The Hall of Sundered Stars had been built to hold mountains. Tonight, it held something heavier. Yvain Maris stood pressed against the cold stone of the western alcove, one hand braced flat against the carved relief of a wolf devouring its own tail. Her breath fogged in shallow bursts that she tried to hide behind her sleeve. From this height, the gallery looked down upon the marble basin of the great hall, where every pack lord, every council elder, every banner-bearing line of the northern reach had assembled to witness what they were calling the binding. She had not been invited. She had walked here through the servants' tunnels with her cloak pulled tight and her face hidden, because the man on the dais below had told her, 3 weeks ago, that she did not need an invitation. He had told her she was already part of him, and what was part of him was part of every stone in this hall. He had told her many things in 3 weeks of silence. Frost rimed the high-arched windows, and the torchlight inside the hall seemed to flicker against it, as though the cold itself were trying to listen. Banners of indigo and pale silver hung from the rafters, each one stitched with the running wolf of House Marrowvane, the ruling line of the Reach for 9 generations. Lesser banners hung beneath them, gold, deep red, the bone white of the Estervale pack, the dark green of the Hollowfen, and at the center of the hall, raised on a dais of black granite, stood a single empty throne carved from a single tusk of the great northern bear. The ceremonial seat of an alpha taking a bonded. The seat had been empty for 11 years. Tonight it would not be. Yvain's gaze fell on the man standing beside it. Cadron Marrowvane, fifth of his name, Alpha of the Northern Reach, looked carved from winter itself. His ceremonial coat was black, with silver thread along the shoulders, fitted across a frame she had memorized in candlelight more times than she could count. His dark hair had been cut shorter for the right. His jaw had the same hard line it always had when he was holding something inside that frightened him. From this distance he should not have been able to see her, but Yvonne had the strangest feeling, as she had the strangest feeling so many times in the last weeks, that some part of him knew exactly where she stood. Her hand drifted to the hollow of her throat, where his pendant should have hung. The silver crescent he had pressed into her palm in the snow garden behind the chapel, 6 months ago, on the night he had bitten the soft skin beneath her collarbone and whispered that the gods themselves had braided their threads together before either of them had been born. She no longer wore the pendant. She had taken it off the morning the summons for the binding had been read aloud at the city gates, and she had laid it inside her wooden chest, and she had wept for an hour with her fist pressed against her mouth so the other healers in the apothecary would not hear. Her other hand drifted lower, to her stomach, where the second secret lived. 3 months. Perhaps a little more. The herb woman in the lower city had confirmed it without needing to be asked. "You are carrying," she had said, her voice gentle in the way of people who already understood that the news would not be welcome. Carrying strong. Yvain had walked home through the snow and stood at her window and watched the lamps come on in the high towers of Marrowvane Keep, where Cadron had not sent her so much as a folded note in 23 days. Now she was here, and the silence had a face, and the face was about to give itself to another woman. A trumpet cried from the gallery opposite. Ivani flinched against the wall. Below, the great oak doors at the southern end of the hall swung inward, and the procession of the bonded began its slow walk down the central aisle. There were 6 candidates. Yvain's eyes did not register the first 5. They locked on the woman walking at the head of the line. Sable Voren moved like she had been preparing for this hall since the day she had learned to walk. Her gown was the color of old wine, threaded with the dark gold of her father's house, and her hair had been bound in a coronet of bronze pins shaped like rowan leaves. She was beautiful in a hard, deliberate way, the way a blade is beautiful, and her smile as she ascended the dais steps was the smile of a woman who already knew where she would sleep tonight. The Voren line controlled the southern silver mines, 3,000 bonded warriors, a river fleet, a blood claim against the throne that went back 4 generations and had been quietly waiting for a moment exactly like this one. Yvain's mark burned beneath her dress. It was not the gentle warmth she had grown used to in the months since Kadrin had given it to her. This was a slow, deliberate heat, like a coal being pressed against her skin, and she pressed her palm to the place beneath her collarbone where the half-moon scar lay hidden, and the heat answered her hand. She thought, he must feel this. He must. She watched his face. His face did not move. The law speaker stepped forward on the dais, an old man bent under the weight of a chain of office that had been forged before any living wolf in the hall had drawn breath. His voice carried, dry and ceremonial. Kadrin of House Marrowvein, Alpha of the Northern Reach, blood of the first den, by the right of your line and the consent of the assembled banners, you are called to take a bonded this night. The candidates have walked. The houses have spoken. The ancient law has been satisfied. The choice is yours. Yvain held her breath. The mark burned hotter. It burned as though it were trying to pull itself out of her skin and fly across the hall to him. She felt her knees lock against the stone. She felt her teeth bite down on the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste copper. She thought of the snow garden. She thought of his mouth at her throat. She thought of his voice in the dark saying, you, only you, in this life and the next one and the one after that. Only you. She watched him step forward. She watched him look down the line of women on the dais, slowly, as though weighing each of them on a scale she could not see. She watched him stop at Sable Vorin. She watched him reach for Sable's hand. The hall was so silent she could hear the wind moving through the high-arched windows. I take Sable of House Vorin, Kadrin said, and his voice was low and even and carried no warmth at all. As bonded of the Northern Reach, by my blood and by my breath, the binding is sealed. The hall exploded into sound. Cheers crashed against the rafters. Banners were dipped and raised in salute. The law speaker lifted his chain in benediction. Sable Vorin turned her face to Kadrin, and her smile was the smile of a hunter who had finally been handed her prey, and Kadrin bent his head and pressed his lips to the back of her hand in the formal acceptance, and the crowd roared again, and somewhere a wolf began to howl in celebration outside the hall walls, and a dozen others took up the cry. Yvain could not feel her body. She watched him lift his head from Sable's hand. She watched his eyes sweep the hall, sweep the gallery, sweep right past the alcove where she stood with her fist pressed to her mouth and tears running silent down her face. And there was nothing in his expression. No flicker, no searching. No private apology hidden in a glance only she would understand. He did not look for her because he was not looking for her. He had not made a mistake. He had made a choice. The mark beneath her dress went suddenly, terribly cold. It was not the cold of dying. It was the cold of something being severed cleanly, the cold of a knife so sharp the wound does not bleed for a long moment after the cut. She understood, with the slow understanding of a woman who has just been killed without knowing yet that she is dead, that he had not been drugged, had not been deceived, had not been forced. He had walked to that dais on his own 2 feet, and he had looked at the woman he had once told he loved more than his own breath, and he had chosen the silver mines and the river fleet and the 4-generation blood claim, and he had let the bond between them go cold in his chest, the way a man lets a candle gutter when he has finished reading. A small sound escaped her. It was not a sob. It was something thinner. Yvain stepped back from the alcove. Her shoulder struck stone. She did not feel it. Her legs carried her without her permission as she turned and walked along the gallery toward the servants' stair, and behind her, the hall continued to celebrate the union that was going to make the Northern Reach unbreakable for another 9 generations. She did not stop walking until she reached the cold air outside the keep walls. She stood in the courtyard with the snow falling around her, and she pressed both hands to her stomach, And she said aloud, very quietly, to the child who had no idea what had just happened, "We are leaving." She returned to her chambers in the lower keep through the servants' tunnels. She packed a single canvas bag, 2 dresses, a wool cloak, her grandmother's bone comb, the small leather pouch of seeds she had been collecting for the herb garden she had been planning to plant in the spring, and which she now understood she would never plant in this city. She paused once at the wooden chest, her hand hovering over the lid, and she did not lift it. The pendant could stay where she had left it. Let it rust there. Let the next servant who cleaned the room find it and wonder. She wrote no letter. She left through the same servant's gate she had used to enter, with the snow falling thicker now, and she walked south along the merchant's road until a grain wagon driver took pity on her and let her ride beside him in exchange for a copper she could not afford to spare. Behind her, the celebration in the Hall of Sundered Stars went on until dawn. She did not see the figure who stepped out onto the high tower above the eastern gate 2 hours after she left, when the celebration had quieted and the great hall had emptied of all but the servants sweeping ash from the braziers. She did not see Cadron Marrowvein stand at the parapet with his hands braced on the stone and his head bent forward and his shoulders shaking in a way no alpha was ever meant to let his guards see. She did not see him drag in a breath that would not come. She did not hear what he said when he finally said it, because he said it to nobody, only to the snow and the dark and the empty road south. "Forgive me." And the wolves of the Reach, for reasons none of their handlers could later explain, began to howl all at once across every kennel in the city, a single rising cry of grief that climbed the towers and shook the bells in the chapel spire, and did not stop for a long time. By the time it stopped, Yvain Maris was already 6 miles south on the Merchant's Road, asleep with her head against a stranger's shoulder, one hand curled protectively over her stomach. She did not hear it. The village of Brennick-on-Marsh sat where 3 rivers braided themselves into one, 400 miles south of the northern reach, in a country that had not heard a wolf howl in living memory. Yvonne had chosen it for that reason. She arrived in the last week of winter, walking the final 12 miles on foot after the traders she had been traveling with took the eastern road instead of the southern one. The midwife of Brennick, a stout woman named Hepsa Tull, took one look at the swollen belly under the road-worn cloak and the hollow set of the young woman's eyes and pointed without comment toward the empty cottage at the edge of the marsh where the previous healer had died the autumn before. "There is a roof," Hepsa said. "There are walls. The well is sweet. If you can mend a fever and set a bone, the village will feed you." Ivani could mend a fever. Bones, too. She could also do other things, but she had decided, somewhere on the long road south, that she would not be doing those things again. The name she gave was Ren Aldermere. Her husband, she said, a wool merchant, had drowned crossing the autumn floods. The village had accepted the story without examining it, the way villages on the edges of kingdoms accept any story that does not threaten them. By the first true week of spring, she was simply the marsh healer. By the second, she was our marsh healer. The villagers brought her bread and dried fish, and the occasional wedge of hard yellow cheese, and she paid them back in willow bark teas for their fevers and poultices, for their winter coughs, and a steady hand at the bedsides of their grandmothers when the dying came, as it always did at the change of seasons. She slept badly. Her belly grew rounder. The midwife frowned at it and pressed her palms to either side and said, carrying strong, "This one, perhaps more than one," and Yvain closed her eyes and did not let herself think about what that might mean. Sometimes, late at night, the child inside her kicked from 2 places at once, and she would lie on her back in the dark with both hands pressed to her stomach and let the tears run sideways into her hair. The mark beneath her collarbone did not fade. She had been told by the only wolf who had ever spoken honestly to her about such things that a rejected bond severs cleanly within the first cycle of the moon. The mark dulls, the skin smooths. The bond's heat goes out of the body the way a forge cools when the fire is banked. She had counted the cycles. 4 had passed. The mark on her collarbone was the same dark crescent it had been the morning Kedron had bitten her, only now it had begun, very slowly, to pulse with a heat that came and went on no schedule she could predict. Sometimes the heat came at the same hour every night, after sunset, as though someone in a far-off room were laying a hand against the place where her mark lived. Sometimes the heat came in the form of dreams. In the dreams she stood in a place that was not anywhere she had ever been. A long corridor of pale stone, an open window full of stars. A figure at the far end of the corridor walking toward her, calling her name in a voice that was not the voice of a man, but the voice of a wolf inside a man, low and broken and constant. She woke from the dreams with her face wet, and her mark burning, and the feeling, for a long disoriented moment, that someone was in the cottage with her. The cottage was always empty. She told herself the dreams were grief. She told herself the heat in the mark was guilt taking longer than it should to die. She told herself that when the babies came, she would have no time for either. And the work of being a mother would burn the bond out of her, the way a fever burns a fever out of the body. She did not believe any of it. The thing she did not let herself examine was simpler than any of these explanations. The bond was not severed. The bond had never been severed. Something in her, the part of her that had been a wolf-bonded woman before she had been in exile, knew what a severed bond felt like, and the thing in her chest was not severed. The thing in her chest was being held at a distance, the way a man holds a wound closed with his own hand, and the pressure of that holding was constant and conscious and coming from someone else. She did not know what it meant. She did not want to know. On the first warm evening of true spring, when the marsh had begun to turn green and the herons had returned to nest along the river bend, a girl named Ottilie came running up the path to the cottage with her braid coming undone behind her. Ottilie was the cooper's youngest, 11 years old and quick as a marsh wren herself, and she had taken to following Yvain on her gathering rounds the way a duckling follows the first warm thing it sees. Yvain had begun, against her own better judgment, to be fond of her. "Mistress Wren!" Ottilie called, breathless before she reached the door. "Mistress Wren, traders are come, from the north." Yvain was kneeling at the herb plot beside the cottage, pressing the new lavender shoots into the warming earth. She did not look up. "That is good, Ottilie. They will have salt." "No, mistress, you do not understand. Northern traders, real ones, from past the reach." Yvain's hand stopped above the soil. She straightened slowly, brushing the dirt from her palms onto her apron, and turned to face the girl. Ottilia's cheeks were flushed pink with running, and her eyes were enormous with the importance of news she did not yet understand. "What did they say, child?" Yvain asked. Her voice came out level. She was proud of it. "They are saying—" Ottilie paused, gulped a breath. "They are saying the alpha of the reach has gone mad." Yvain did not move. "Mad how?" she said. "Mad like a wolf with no head," the trader said. "He said the alpha is tearing his own kingdom apart. He said the alpha put aside his bonded the day after the binding feast, refused to let her into his rooms, refused to say her name. He said the alpha has been riding south for months, with his guard searching for someone. A woman. The trader did not know her name. Nobody knows her name." Ottilia's voice dropped, awed by her own words. "But he said the alpha has offered 15,000 gold marks to anyone who can tell him where she is." 15,000 gold marks. Yvain heard the number from somewhere very far away. The mark beneath her collarbone gave a single, deep, deliberate pulse, like a heart kicking once against a closed fist, and she pressed her palm to it before she could stop herself. He did not say what she did? Yvain heard herself ask. Ottilie shook her head. Only that he wants her. Only that he will not stop until he has her. The trader said the harvests have failed in the eastern provinces, that the Alpha's wolves have gone strange and will not hunt for the pack lords, that half the council has begged him to stop, and he will not stop. The girl hesitated, and then, very quietly, with the seriousness only an 11-year-old can manage, she said, Mistress Wren, my mother says he is a cruel man. To love a woman that hard after he cast her aside. My mother says he should let her be. Yvain did not answer. She turned her face away, toward the marsh, toward the slow gold light dying over the rivers, and she set her hand on the curve of her belly and felt the babies kick, one against her left palm and one against her right, as though they had heard the news and were trying to tell her something she was not yet ready to understand. He was searching for her. He had cast her aside in the most public way the laws of his people allowed. He had bonded himself to another woman in front of the assembled banners. He had walked away from the dais without looking for her in the crowd. And then, the day after, he had put aside the woman he had bound himself to, and he had begun to ride south. And he had been riding south ever since, with 15,000 gold marks in his saddlebags, for the first throat that would tell him where she had gone. This was not the behavior of a man who had simply made a political choice. This was not the behavior of a man at all. Yvonne stood very still in the herb plot with the spring evening cooling around her, and somewhere underneath the grief that had been her companion for 4 months, an old, hard, careful instinct began to wake. He was not coming for her, out of love. A man who loved a woman did not cast her aside in front of 1,000 witnesses and then ride after her as though she were a stolen thing. He was coming for her because something had gone wrong. Something had gone wrong, and he did not yet know how wrong. And Yvain Maris, who had once been a girl in love and was no longer, understood in the cooling spring evening that whatever was happening in the northern reach was bigger than her broken heart, and that her broken heart was not going to be allowed to remain broken in peace. Ottilie, she said. Yes, mistress? Go home to your mother. Tell her not to speak of the trader's news again where I can hear it. Tell her I asked it as a favor. Ottilie nodded, suddenly solemn, and turned and ran back down the path toward the village. Yvain stood alone in the herb plot until the sun was fully gone. Then she went inside the cottage and she barred the door, and she took down from the high shelf the canvas bag she had not unpacked since the night she had left Marrowvane Keep, and she began, slowly and methodically, to inventory what was inside it. She did not know yet what she was going to do. But the part of her that had once been a wolf-bonded woman, the part she had told herself she had buried in the snow on the road south, was waking up, and it was hungry. They came on the 7th night of the warm spell, when the marsh frogs had begun their first courtship singing, and the moon was a thin curved blade above the river bend. Yvain was awake when she heard the dogs. She had been awake for most of the last 7 nights, since the news of the traitors, since she had begun to feel, and she could no longer pretend she was imagining it, that the pulse in her mark was getting steadily, deliberately, stronger. The thing in her chest that had been held at a distance was no longer being held at a distance. The thing in her chest was closer. She had been lying on her side in the narrow bed with her hand pressed to her belly, listening to the babies move when the Cooper's 2 big mastiffs at the far end of the village began to bark. Not the bark of strangers on the road, the bark of wolves. Yvain was on her feet before she had decided to stand. She moved through the cottage in the dark, not lighting a candle, her bare feet silent on the swept stone. She lifted the heavy iron poker from beside the hearth. She crossed to the front window and looked out through the seam where the shutter did not quite close. The dogs at the Cooper's house had stopped barking. That was worse than the barking. Yvain stood at the window with the poker in one hand and the other hand resting on the swell of her stomach, and she watched the line of black trees at the edge of the marsh, and after a long moment she saw what she had known she was going to see. Two shapes had stepped out of the trees and were standing very still in the grass. They were not dogs. The smaller of the two was the size of a yearling stag. The larger was bigger than any wolf had any right to be, and even at this distance, even in the thin moonlight, Yvain could see that its coat was the deep silver iron of a wolf bred in the high passes of the north. Its head was lifted. It was not looking at the village. It was looking at her cottage. The mark beneath her collarbone seized. It was not the slow pulse of the last weeks. It was a hot, hard, claiming press, as though a hand had been laid flat against the scar and was holding it there. Yvain gasped and dropped the poker. She caught the windowsill with both hands. The sound that came out of her was not quite a word. Through the seam in the shutter she watched the two wolves step forward, one slow, careful pace, and then another, and then stop. They were not coming closer. They were waiting. Waiting for what? A knock. Yvain jerked away from the window. The knock was not at the front door. It was at the kitchen door, the one that opened onto the herb plot, the one nobody in the village used because the path to it was overgrown with marsh mint. 3 slow, deliberate raps, paced like a heartbeat. A woman's voice, low and careful. "Mistress Wren, open the door. We have very little time." Yvain's hand went to the iron poker on the floor. "I do not know you," she said. "You do not," the voice agreed. "But I know you. I know the name you were born with, and I know the mark on your collarbone, and I know what you are carrying in your belly. I am here as a friend. I am here as someone who has been looking for you for considerably longer than the man who is also looking for you. And if I do not come inside in the next minute, the people I came south to outrun will find this cottage before sunrise, and your children will not see their first summer." Yvain stood frozen in the dark. There were 1,000 reasons not to open the door. She opened it. The woman who stepped through was small and gray and old. Not old in the way of village grandmothers, but old as ancient trees are old as stones at the bottom of rivers. She wore a traveling coat of dark green wool. Her hair was the color of pewter, braided tightly against her skull. Her eyes were a pale and disconcerting blue, almost colorless, and they fixed on Yvain with the kind of attention that was not curious because it had stopped being curious a long time ago. She was carrying a long staff of black wood, and around her neck, on a thin leather cord, hung a pendant that Yvain recognized. It was a half-moon, not silver, bone. Yvain took a single step backward. "Who are you?" she said. It was not a question. "My name is Mireth Solwyn," the old woman said. "I am the last living speaker of the hollowed line. I have walked 1,200 miles to find you, Yvain Maris of nowhere and no house, and I have not slept in 8 days, and I am about to tell you 3 things that are going to break what is left of your world." "May I sit down?" Yvain could not speak. She gestured at the chair beside the hearth. Marith Solwyn sat. She set the black staff across her knees. She breathed out slowly, the way an old woman breathes when she has finally been allowed to set down a weight she has been carrying for a long time. "Listen carefully," she said, "because we will be interrupted, and I do not know how soon." Yvain did not move from the doorway. The 2 wolves outside had not come closer. She could feel them at the edge of her awareness, like sentries. "Yours?" she asked, jerking her chin toward the dark. "Mine," Marith said. "They have run from the high country with me. They are tired and they are hungry, and they will die for you tonight if it is asked of them, because the blood in your veins is older than the blood in any wolf in the northern reach, and they have known it from 100 miles off." "I am a healer's daughter from the lower city of Marrowvane," Yvain said. Her voice was thin. "I have no blood. I have no house. Kedron Marrowvane was the first wolf-bonded creature who ever spoke to me as though I were a person." "Yes," Marith said, And now I will tell you the first thing. She looked up, and her colorless eyes were very steady. The hollowed line is the eldest line of wolf blood in the known world. It predates the founding of the Reach by 600 years. Its sovereigns were always women. Its last queen was murdered in her bed by a marrow vein alpha 11 generations ago, and her daughters were hunted across 3 winters until the line was believed to be ended. It was not ended. One daughter survived. She fled south. Her daughter's daughters lived as healers and midwives and bone setters in villages too small for the Reach to bother with, and they passed down the mark from mother to daughter, and they hid it, and they waited. Marith lifted her hand. With one finger, she pointed at the place on Ivani's collarbone where the half-moon scar lay hidden under her shift. That mark is not the mark Cadron Marrowvein gave you, Marith said. That mark was on you the day you were born. He bit you on top of a mark that already existed. Did he ever tell you why he chose that exact place on your throat, Yvain Maris? Out of all the places on your body he could have laid his teeth? Yvain's hand flew to her collarbone. The world tilted. He did not choose, Marith said. His wolf chose. His wolf knew. His wolf bit the mark of the hollowed queen because his wolf knew, even if the man inside him did not, that there is no other woman in the living world he could have bitten. You are not a healer's daughter who was loved by an alpha. You are the heir of the hollowed line, and the man who put you aside has bonded himself to a daughter of one of the houses that hunted your foremothers across 3 winters, and the wolves of the Reach have been going mad because the wolves of the Reach can feel, the way only wolves can feel, that their alpha has put aside a queen older than his throne and bound himself to the line that murdered her. Yvain lowered herself very slowly into the second chair beside the hearth. She did not feel her legs. You are lying, she whispered. I am not, Marith said. And in a moment you are going to ask me how Cadron Marrowvein, who is by all accounts an honorable and intelligent man, could have done what he did. And I will tell you the second thing. Marith reached into the folds of her dark green coat. She drew out a folded square of parchment, sealed in dark red wax, the seal already broken. She laid it on the small table between them. Read it, Marith said. It was carried south by a man my wolves stopped on the road 3 nights ago. It was being delivered to a courier in the lower country, who would have carried it on to a hired blade in this village. It is going to tell you who has been making Cadron Marrowvein's choices for him for the last year. Yvain unfolded the parchment with hands that did not feel like her hands. The handwriting was a cramped, careful script. The signature at the bottom was a single rune she did not recognize, but the seal in the wax was unmistakable, the crossed daggers of House Vorin. She read, The girl is found. Brennick on Marsh, the Marsh Healer Cottage. She is heavy with the twins. Take her quickly and quietly. The Alpha is closing on her position, and we must not allow the bond to be reopened. The compound has held him in check for 14 months, but the wolves are slipping it now. And if she is alive when he reaches her, there will be no covering what was done. Burn the cottage. Burn her. Leave nothing for the Alpha to find but ash. The bonded sends her thanks, and her further patience will not be required. The parchment shook in Yvain's hands. Compound, she said. Wolfsbane, Marith said quietly, mixed with 8 other herbs whose names I will tell you another night. It does not break a bond. It cannot. But it dulls the wolf inside the man. It blinds the bond. It lets the man function while the animal that knows the truth of his heart is held under water. It has been in Cadron Marrowvein's wine and his bread and his bathing salts for 14 months. The Vorin line has been feeding it to him since the night he first told one of his confidants that he intended to declare you his bonded. Ivani stared at the parchment. She stared at it until the words blurred. She thought, he did not cast me aside. She thought, he cast me aside. Both things were true. He had walked to the dais on his own feet. The man had walked. The man had spoken. The man had bound himself to Sable Voren in front of 1,000 witnesses, and the man bore the weight of that choice the way any man bears the weight of a choice his hand had made. But the wolf in him had been held under water for 14 months, and the wolf in him had not been given a vote. A small, terrible sound came out of Yvain's throat. "Yes," Marith said gently, "both at once. That is the kind of grief this is." "He is coming," Yvain said. "He is coming," Mareth agreed. "And that is the third thing I came south to tell you, and it is the one we have the least time for. The compound is failing. His wolf is breaking through. By the next full moon, perhaps sooner, the man will know what has been done to him, and he will know who did it, and the northern reach will burn for it. The Voren line knows this. They are racing him to you. They have to put you in the ground before he wakes up. Because once he wakes up, the law of the reach gives him the right to set aside the binding on grounds of conspiracy, and if he sets aside the binding while you are still alive and carrying his children, the Voren line is finished forever." Marith reached across the table. She laid her cold, dry old hand over Yvain's. "Child," she said, "listen to me. There is a place I can take you. There is a hall in the high country, 3 days' ride from here, that has been empty for 11 generations. The hollowed line has waited for its queen to come home. The wolves of the high country still answer to the old name. If we can reach it before the Voren blades reach you, you will not need to be saved by Cadron Marrowvein. You will not need to be saved by anyone. You will walk back to the northern reach as the only thing on this earth to whom Cadron Marrowvein and Sable Voren and every house in the reach must answer. You will walk back as the hollowed queen, and the law will bend to you, because the law was yours before it was theirs." A wolf howled, very close to the cottage. Marith's head came up sharply. Her colorless eyes went past Yvain to the window. "That is not one of mine," she said. The howl was answered from the south, then from the east, then a third time, closer than either. The wolves at the tree line began to growl. Marith Solwyn rose from the chair with the easy speed of a woman half her apparent age. She gripped the black staff in one hand, and with the other she gripped Yvain's wrist hard. "They are here," Marith said, "earlier than I dared to hope. Get up, child, get up now. The blades have come for you, and we have one chance to be gone before they reach this door. And after that, I cannot promise you anything." Yvain Maris, who had not yet decided whether she believed any of it, who had not yet decided whether she was a healer's daughter or the heir of a line that had been dead for 11 generations, whose hand was still pressed to a parchment that said, "Burn her, burn the cottage, leave nothing," rose to her feet in the dark of her own kitchen. The first arrow came through the window a heartbeat later. The arrow buried itself in the doorframe a hand's breadth from Yvain's shoulder. The shaft was black. The fletching was black. The tip glistened with something dark and oily that was not blood. Yvain stared at it for the half-heartbeat it took her brain to understand that she was supposed to be dead, and then Marith Solwyn yanked her sideways with a strength no woman of that apparent age should have possessed, and threw her bodily behind the heavy oak table. The second arrow came through the window above the herb shelf and shattered a row of clay jars. "Down!" Marith said, not loudly. "Stay down." Outside, a wolf screamed. Yvain had heard wolves howl before. She had never heard a wolf scream. The sound was high and ragged and ended in something that was not quite a yelp, and she understood, with the dull clarity of a woman whose mind has gone too cold to feel anything, that one of Marith's 2 wolves had just died. The kitchen door exploded inward. A man came through it sideways, low, fast, a long curved blade in each hand. He was wrapped in dark cloth from his boots to the cowl that hid his face. And he moved, as Yvain recognized from a single distant memory, with the silent precision of the Voren household guard at court banquets, soft as cats, never quite where the eye expected them to be. He came for Marith first. The old woman did not move from where she stood in the kitchen. The black staff stayed lowered. Her feet did not brace. She simply waited, with her colorless eyes fixed on the assassin's hooded face, and when his first blade came down in a stroke meant to take her head from her shoulders, she stepped sideways into a space that should not have existed in the small kitchen and brought the bottom of the staff up under his chin. There was a sound like a green branch being broken. The assassin folded. He hit the stone floor and did not move again. Marith did not look at the body. "Up," she said to Ivan. "Out the front, now. There is at least one more in the herb plot and another at the well. We go through the front and east, into the marsh. The marsh is mine. They cannot follow us through the marsh." "Your wolf," Yvain started. "Is dead," Marith said. Her voice did not change. "Up, child." Yvain got up. Her legs worked. That was the first surprise. The second surprise was that her hands were not shaking. She had spent 4 months in this cottage convinced that she was a woman whose courage had been used up on a single night in the Hall of Sundered Stars, and now there was an arrow tip leaking poison into her doorframe and a body on her kitchen floor, and her hands were not shaking at all. She picked up the iron poker. "Front door," Marith said. They went through the front. The night outside was no longer quiet. The air had taken on the particular silence that follows violence, the silence of birds and frogs and night insects all going still at once, because something larger and more dangerous than them has entered the field. Ivani's bare feet hit the cold ground. The mark beneath her collarbone was burning so hot now she could smell it, a faint, scorched iron scent under her shift. A second assassin came around the corner of the cottage. This one had a crossbow. Yvain saw the crossbow lift toward Marith's back, and something in her, the part that had been waking up for a week, the part that Marith had named the hollowed line, moved without asking permission. She threw the iron poker. In her life, she had never thrown a poker. She did not know how to throw a poker. The poker tumbled end over end through the dark and struck the assassin square in the throat, and the crossbow discharged into the dirt at his feet. And Yvain stood in her own herb plot in her bare feet with her mouth open, watching a man fall to the ground and not get up again. And she felt, for the first time in 4 months, a small warm kindling in her chest that was not grief. Marith glanced at her. The old woman's mouth twitched, very slightly. "There she is," Marith said quietly, almost to herself. Then, louder, "Run, Yvain." They ran. Across the herb plot, around the back of the cottage, into the long grass of the marsh edge. Yvain's belly was a weight at the front of her body that did not belong in a flight like this, and her breath was already coming hard, and Mareth's gnarled old hand was clamped around her wrist and pulling her along at a pace Yvain would not have believed the old woman's body could sustain. A wolf came up out of the dark beside them. The big silver iron one, Mareth's surviving wolf. It fell into pace at Yvain's hip without a sound, its great body brushing her thigh as they ran, its eyes fixed forward. "2 more behind us," Marith said. Her breath was even. "Do not look back. The water is a 1/4 mile east. If we make the water—" She did not finish the sentence. A horn sounded. It came from the north. It was not a hunting horn. It was not the brass cry of a Vorin captain rallying his blades. It was something deeper, longer, a low rolling note that climbed up through the marsh and rang against the bones of Yvain's chest like a struck bell, and her mark blazed white-hot under her shift, and her knees buckled, and Marith caught her before she fell. "Oh," Marith breathed. "Oh, child, oh no." "What?" Yvain gasped. "What is that?" "The Alpha of the Reach," Marith said. "He has reached us first." The horn sounded again, closer. Yvain's mark answered it without her permission. The crescent under her collarbone flared so hard that she cried out, and the cry was high and broken, and not the cry of a woman in pain, but the cry of a wolf who has been in a cage too long, and Marith's surviving wolf at her hip threw back its great head and answered. 3 more wolves answered from the north, then a dozen, then a pack. The marsh, which had been quiet, began to vibrate with movement Yvonne could not see, but could feel through the soles of her feet. Wolves were running. Many wolves. They were converging on the cottage from the north and east, and they were not Mareth's, and they were not Voran blades. And Yvain understood, with the cold clarity of a woman who has lost her chance to choose, that the man she had run from 4 months ago had finally caught her. Mareth, she said. Her voice did not sound like hers. Mareth, I am not ready. You do not have to be ready, the old woman said. You have to be alive. Listen to me, Yvonne, listen carefully. He is going to want to take you back to the Reach. He is going to believe, because he is a man and he loves you, that the safest place for you is at his side. He is wrong. The Reach is the second most dangerous place on this earth for you, after this cottage. He cannot protect you in his own keep, because his own keep has been poisoning him for 14 months. Do you understand what I am telling you? He cannot take you home, Mareth said. You must take him home, to the high country, to the hall I told you about. That is the only ground he will be safe on, and the only ground from which the law can be set right. Do not let him carry you back to the Reach, child. He will die there, and you will die with him. Promise me. A wolf the size of a horse came over the rise of the marsh grass in front of them. It was not silver iron, it was black. Black as a moonless lake, black as a starless sky, and its eyes were a wet, golden fire, and the second it saw her it stopped dead in the long grass with all 4 paws planted and its ribs heaving, and its lips drawn back from teeth that were longer than any teeth Yvain had ever imagined existed inside a wolf's mouth. It looked at her. It made a sound that was not a growl. It was lower than a growl. It was the sound a forge makes when the bellows are pumped too hard and the fire gets ahead of the smith, a deep, choking roar of containment. The mark beneath Yvain's collarbone opened. She felt it. She actually felt it. The thing in her chest that had been held at a distance for 4 months, the wound she had told herself was severed and was not. The cold place where Cadron Marrowvein had been holding his own grief away from hers because he had known, somehow, that if he let her feel his grief in full she would die of it. That wound opened, and his grief came through it. And it came through it all at once. Yvain fell to her knees in the marsh grass. She could not breathe. There was too much of him. There was 14 months of him. There was the night of the binding and the morning after and every hour of every day he had ridden south. And there was the way he had loved her before any of this had happened, raw and bright and unprotected. And there was the way he hated himself now, every part of himself, the man and the wolf, and the alpha and the marrow vein, all of them, every one. She heard herself sobbing. She heard, a long way away, Mareth Solwyn saying something to her in a low, urgent voice she could not parse. She heard, much closer, the sound of the great black wolf moving toward her through the grass, slow, one careful pace at a time, the way a man approaches a creature he is afraid he will break by being seen. It stopped a body's length from her. It lowered its enormous head to the ground. It made the choking forge sound again, and this time she understood that it was a wolf trying to weep. Cadron, she whispered. The shift took him between one breath and the next. He came up out of it on his knees in the marsh grass, naked and shaking, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with the sweat of 14 months of suppression breaking at once. His skin was paler than she remembered. His face was thinner. There was a long, unhealed gash down the side of his jaw. The kind of wound a man takes when he is no longer sleeping enough to dodge a blow he should have dodged. He did not reach for her. He held out one hand, palm down, fingers slightly curled, the way a man offers his hand to a wolf that has every reason to bite. Ivane, he said. His voice was wrecked. It was barely a voice. Ivane, I did not know. She did not move. She could not. Her own body had stopped obeying her. She knelt in the marsh grass with her hand pressed to her belly and her other hand pressed to her mark, and she stared at the man she had loved more than her own life, and she felt, opening up inside her, a fury so old and so deep and so patient that she understood, all at once, that it had not been hers to begin with. It had been waiting in her blood for 11 generations. It had been waiting since a marrow-vein alpha had murdered a hollowed queen in her bed. It was waking up now. It was looking out through her eyes at the kneeling, weeping, half-broken alpha of the northern reach, and it was deciding whether to forgive him. Behind her, very quietly, Marith Solwyn said, "Now, child. Now is when you choose." Ivane Maris, who had been a healer's daughter and a servant girl and a mistress in shadows and an exile in a marsh, lifted her chin. She looked at Cadron Marrowvein, and the thing inside her that had been waking up for a week finally opened its eyes. She did not speak. For a long moment she only looked at him, looked at the hollows under his eyes that had not been there 4 months ago, looked at the thinness of his bared shoulders, looked at the gash on his jaw and the way his hand was still held out toward her, palm down, fingers slightly curled, the hand of a man who knew he had no right to ask for anything and was asking anyway. Behind him, in the long grass, his pack had arrived. Ivane registered them at the edge of her sight without looking directly at them. 8 wolves, perhaps 10, ranged in a wide, loose half-ring around their alpha, none of them within 20 paces of her. They had stopped where they were because he had stopped where he was. They were not snarling. They were not advancing. They waited, as wolves wait when their alpha has gone still in a way that cannot be questioned. The largest of them, a brindle she-wolf with a white throat, lowered her head almost to the ground and began to whine. The whine was directed at Ivane. Ivane understood, somewhere underneath the roar of his grief still pouring through her opened mark, that the brindle wolf was not afraid of her. The brindle wolf was bowing to her. The wolves of the Reach knew what their alpha had only just begun to remember. She looked back at Cadron. "Get up," she said. Her voice came out level. She was vaguely surprised by it. He flinched. He did not move. "Get up, Cadron Marrowvein. I will not speak to you while you are kneeling in the dirt half-naked. Stand up like the alpha you are and look at me." Marith Solwyn, somewhere behind her, made a small sound that might have been approval. Cadron rose. He rose slowly, like an injured man rises, with his weight braced through one leg and his hand pressed briefly to the gash on his jaw to keep from staggering. One of his pack, a tall, lean man shape that had been a wolf a moment before, stepped forward out of the half-ring with a folded gray cloak in his hands and laid it across his alpha's shoulders without a word, then fell back. Cadron pulled the cloak closed at his throat with hands that were not steady. He met her eyes. He did not flinch from them. That was something. The man she had loved had always been able to look at hard things directly, and whatever 14 months of poisoning had taken from him, it had not taken that. "Speak," she said. His voice broke. He tried again. "I do not know what to say to you that you would believe. Try." He drew in a breath. It was a long, ragged, uneven breath, the breath of a man surfacing from a long time underwater. "I have been poisoned," he said, "for 14 months. My wolf has been held under, and the man has been allowed to make decisions the wolf would have refused. I did not know. I felt it. I felt it the way a man feels a stone in his boot that he never takes the time to look at. I knew something was wrong. I told myself it was the council. I told myself it was my father's death and the weight of the binding law and the pressure from the pack lords. I told myself 100 things. I never told myself that someone had put poison in my cup, because I am the alpha of the Northern Reach, and I did not believe such a thing was possible inside my own keep. He stopped. He swallowed. I bonded myself to Sable Vorin in the Hall of Sundered Stars in front of 1,000 witnesses. The man did that. The wolf in me screamed and could not be heard. The next morning, the wolf got close enough to the surface to reach my mouth, and I refused her my chamber. The morning after that, I refused her my table. By the third day, I had put her aside in everything but the law, and the council was at my door demanding to know what was wrong with me, and I could not tell them, because I did not know. His eyes had not left hers. I felt you leave the city, he said, the night of the binding. I felt the moment you crossed the southern gate. I felt it in my chest like a hand being pulled out of a wound. I did not understand what I was feeling. The compound was still in my food. The wolf was still under the water. But the bond between us is not a thing the compound could cut, only blind. And the bond knew. I tried to ride after you that same night, and the compound pulled me back into the keep before I had reached the gate. It took me 3 more days to fight the wolf far enough to the surface to ride out and stay out. I have been riding ever since. Every day since the 3rd day I have been riding south. Ivan. Every day. I have not slept in any bed I did not sleep on the ground beside. I have not eaten any food that did not come out of a sealed wineskin or a sack we cut open ourselves on the road. The compound has been failing in my blood for a month. Tonight, when I came over the last rise and saw the cottage and felt your mark open for me. He stopped again. A muscle in his jaw worked. Tonight I remembered everything, he said. All of it. The garden, the pendant, the night I bit you. Every word I ever said to you. Every word I ever broke. I remembered them all at once, and I remembered the woman who has been pouring the compound into my wine for 14 months. And I remembered her father, and I remembered her uncle, and I remembered every name on every roll of every house that has been moving against this throne for 4 generations. And Ivane, his voice cracked, finally, and he did not bother to repair it. Ivan, I have come to ask you for 2 things, and I do not have any right to either of them. Name them, she said. Forgiveness, he said, and the chance to put it right. She did not answer for a long time. She let his words settle. She let her own breath settle. She felt, beneath the surface of her mind, the old furious thing that had woken in her blood pulling at her. Strike him. Hurt him. Give him back a measure of the wound he gave you. And she felt, beneath that, the woman she had been 4 months ago. The woman who had stood in the Hall of Sundered Stars with a child in her belly and a pendant against her heart, and watched him take another woman's hand. Both of them were her. Both of them were in her chest right now, and she let them both speak. And then she let them both be quiet. When she spoke, her voice was very calm. You did not cast me aside, Kedron Marrowvein. The man did. The man walked to that dais on his own legs and spoke the binding words with his own mouth, and the man bears that for the rest of his life, whether or not the wolf in him agreed. He bowed his head. Yes, he said. I am not going to absolve you of it. No. I am also not going to pretend I do not know who put the compound in your cup. I am not going to pretend the man inside the Alpha is the only one accountable for what happened to me. There is a house in the Reach that has been hunting my line for 11 generations, and I did not know it was hunting me until tonight. They used you to do it, Kedron. They used your hand. The fact that they used your hand does not mean your hand is innocent, but it also does not mean your hand was the only one on the blade. His head came up. Your line, he said slowly. Marith Solwyn stepped forward then, into the half-circle of his pack. the black staff of hollowed wood held loose in her gnarled hand. The brindle she-wolf turned her head toward Marith and made a low sound that was almost a question. Marith did not look at the wolf. She looked at the alpha of the northern reach. "My name is Marith Solwyn," she said. "I am the last living speaker of the hollowed line. The mark beneath your bonded's collarbone was not given by you. It was answered by you. Your wolf bit her on top of a mark 11 generations old, because your wolf knew what you did not. The woman you bound yourself to in the Hall of Sundered Stars is the daughter of the house that murdered the last hollowed queen in her bed. The Vorin line has been waiting since that night for a marrow vein alpha to mate the last daughter of the line they ended, so they could end her too, and end her line for good, and take the throne by the older blood claim they have been hoarding for 11 generations. They almost had it. They had you for 14 months. They had you in your cup, and your bread and your bath. And they would have had her tonight, in this marsh, with 12 hired blades and a fire." Kadrin did not move. Yvain watched his face go through something she did not have a name for. A loosening. A reordering. The face of a man who has spent 14 months trying to make sense of small wrong things and is being shown, at last, the single large wrong thing they all add up to. His eyes came back to her. "Twins," he said. It was not a question. He had felt it through the mark when it opened. "Twins," she said. His knees almost went again. He caught himself on the brindle wolf's shoulder, and the brindle did not move, only turned her head slightly to brace him. "Yvain." "Yes." "I will burn the Vorin line off the face of the reach." "I know." "I will set aside the binding tonight, by dawn. The law allows it on grounds of conspiracy, and we have enough now to prove conspiracy 3 times over, and I will have the law speaker pulled from his bed at this hour if I have to." "Kadrin." She said it quietly. He stopped. "We are not riding back to the Reach." He stared at her. "What?" "Marith has told me 3 things tonight. The third is that the Reach is no longer safe ground for you. The compound has been in your keep for 14 months. In your kitchens, in the hands of servants you cannot tell from loyal ones. Vorin is still in your hall. Half her house's blades are still inside your gates. If you ride back into Marrowvein Keep tonight, you ride back into the place where they have been killing you slowly for over a year. They will finish it inside a week." "Then where?" "The high country," Marith said. "The hollowed hall. 3 days' ride east. The hall has stood empty for 11 generations, and the wolves of the high country still answer to the old name. We go there. The bonded recovers his strength on ground that cannot be poisoned. The hollowed queen is seated on the throne her foremothers were murdered out of. And then, Alpha of the Reach, when you are no longer being held underwater and your queen is no longer a healer's daughter from a cottage in a marsh, then you both ride back to the Reach, and you ride back together. And you do not ride back as a man fetching a runaway mate. You ride back as the joined sovereigns of 2 lines, and Sable Vorin answers to you both." The half-circle of wolves around Kadrin had begun, very quietly, to lower their heads. It started with the brindle, then the black and gray at his right, then the others, one at a time, until every wolf in the half-circle was bowing, ears flat, throats bared in the old gesture wolves use when they acknowledge a sovereign that is not their own. They were not bowing to Kadrin. They were bowing to her. Yvain felt the moment. She felt it land inside her body like a stone dropping into a deep well. The thing in her blood that had been waking up for a week finished waking up. She rose slowly from her knees in the marsh grass. There was no stagger in it. None was needed. She felt Marith's hand briefly, lightly, against the small of her back, steadying her, and then withdrawing, because Marith Solwyn had been waiting 11 generations for someone to stand, without needing to be steadied, and she would not insult the moment by holding her up. Yvain looked at Kadrin. He had gone to one knee. Not the half-collapse of a broken man this time, the deliberate, formal kneel of an alpha acknowledging a queen. His gray cloak was pooled around him in the dirt. His head was bowed. His right hand, palm up, was extended toward her. The old marrow-vein gesture of a sworn sword offered to a sovereign. "My queen," he said. She took his hand. There was no pull to bring him up. She held it. She let her thumb pass once, slowly, across the knuckles she had once kissed in a snow garden in another life, and she felt, through her mark and through his, the shudder that went through him at her touch. "Get up, Kadrin," she said quietly. "We have 3 days of hard riding ahead of us, and you are going to need to sleep at some point, and I am not letting you sleep until we are out of this marsh." He came up. He looked at her with eyes that were almost gold all the way through now. The wolf in him fully surfaced for the first time in 14 months, and she saw, behind the gold, the man who had loved her in the snow garden, and she saw, behind the man, the wolf who had bitten her on top of a mark he had not known was there, and she understood that the work of forgiving him was not going to be done tonight, and she understood that she was going to do it anyway, because the work of forgiving him was already beginning whether she had given it permission or not. A horn sounded, far to the south. Vorin. Marith Solwyn swore in a language Yvain did not recognize. "They have not given up," the old woman said. "They will not give up. They know what tonight costs them. We ride. Now. Alpha, can your pack carry too?" "My pack can carry whatever the queen requires," Kadrin said. Ivani's breath caught. The brindle wolf walked forward and lowered her shoulder beside Yvain's hand. She mounted, slowly, with Kadrin's hands at her waist to steady the weight of her belly, and she settled herself across the broad, warm back of a wolf that had been bowing to her 30 seconds ago, and she looked down at the alpha of the northern reach, and she said, "East, to the high country. Move." He moved. The marsh emptied of wolves like water emptying from a tilted bowl, and they ran east into the dark, and the horns of House Vorin faded behind them, and the second cliff of Yvain Maris's life, the one she had not seen coming, closed shut behind her. The high country was not what she had pictured. For 3 days they rode east and north, climbing out of the river country into a land of long, pale grass and bare granite ridges and slow, gray rivers that carried meltwater down from the snowfields. The wolves of the reach paced them in a wide, loose ring, taking turns running and shifting and walking on 2 legs as men and women of Kadrin's hand-picked guard. Marith Solwyn rode a small, tough mountain pony she had whistled out of a thicket on the second morning. Yvain rode alternately on the brindle she-wolf and, when the wolf needed rest, in front of Kadrin on his own black stallion, with his arm wrapped firm and unmoving across her belly and his cloak drawn around her shoulders against the wind. He did not speak much. He was, she realized on the second day, recovering. The compound had been in him for 14 months, and the body of a man poisoned for 14 months does not heal in a single night. Even an alpha's body. Even a wolf's body. He slept badly. He ate slowly. He had tremors in his offhand that came and went without warning, and he did not try to hide them from her. And on the second night, when he caught her watching him press his shaking left hand flat against his thigh to stop it, he said only, "It will pass. The wolf will burn the rest of it out. He is hungry for it." "How long?" she asked. "Days, perhaps a week. I will be no use in a fight before then." "You are not going to be in a fight. My queen, Kadrin, you are not going to be in a fight on the ride to the hollowed hall. If they catch us, you will be in a fight whether I want you to be or not, but I am not going to send you into one with your hand still shaking. Sleep. Eat what Marith puts in front of you. I will keep watch with her tonight." He held her gaze in silence. "You are different," he said. It was not an accusation. It was almost wondering. "Yes. When? When I left the keep, I think. Maybe before. I have been a different woman for 4 months, and I did not know it until tonight. He bent his head and pressed his mouth lightly to the crown of her hair. He did not ask. She did not pull away. That was the second day. On the third morning, with the snowfields glittering pink gold in the dawn light to the north, and a thin, cold wind running down out of the pass, they came over a ridge and saw the hollowed hall. Yvain reined the brindle wolf to a stop without meaning to. The hall sat at the head of a long, pale valley, its back to a spur of black mountain, its face toward the rising sun. It was not large, the way the Hall of Sundered Stars was large. It was old. It was older than any building Yvain had ever seen with her own eyes. Older than the founding stones of Marrowvane Keep. Older than the cathedral spires of the lower city. It had been built of the same black granite as the spur behind it, and it had been built so long ago that the wind had rounded the corners of its towers the way water rounds a stone. Around its base, in a wide ring, stood a circle of standing stones, 12 of them, each one carved with the running figure of a wolf-headed woman. Smoke was rising from one chimney. "It is not empty," Yvain said. "It has not been empty for 11 generations," Marith said quietly, beside her on the pony. "Only unqueened. There have always been keepers, 3 of us at a time. 2 are dead now. I am the 3rd. The fires have been kept lit, child. The fires were always going to be kept lit until the queen came home." Yvain could not speak. She felt Kadrin's hand at her back, very gently, between her shoulder blades. "Go on, my queen," he said. "It has been waiting for you." They rode down into the valley. The keeper who came out to meet them at the standing stones was a young man, perhaps 20, with the colorless eyes of the hollowed line and a quiet, steady face that did not change when he saw the alpha of the Northern Reach in the procession behind his mistress. Marith said his name was Vale. He bowed to Yvain the same way the brindle wolf had bowed to her in the marsh, ears down, throat bared. He did not bow to Kadrin. He acknowledged Kadrin with a single nod, as a guest is acknowledged. The hollowed hall, inside, was warmer than Yvain had braced for. The fires were lit. The floors had been swept. The high vaulted main chamber, which she had expected to find dust-choked and crumbling, had been kept the way a temple is kept, with fresh rushes on the stone and clean linen on the long table, and a low fire of mountain pine burning in the great hearth. Above the hearth, mounted on the wall, was a pair of wolf's teeth as long as her forearm, bound in silver wire, and below them a single iron crown so plain and so worn she did not understand what it was at first. "The crown of the hollowed queens," Marith said quietly, beside her. "It has not been on a head in 11 generations. It will not be on yours tonight either. There is a right. It will wait. Sit, child. Eat. You are about to become a great many things, but tonight you are a tired pregnant woman who has been on a wolf's back for 3 days, and the queen can wait until tomorrow." She sat. Val brought hot broth. Kadrin ate beside her, slowly, and his hand stopped shaking somewhere around the second cup of it. Marith watched both of them with the pale, steady gaze of a woman who had spent a very long time keeping fires lit for guests who had not yet arrived, and who was now allowing herself, perhaps for the first time, the small luxury of believing the wait had not been wasted. After the meal, Kadrin rose. "Sleep," Yvain said. "In a moment, my queen." He looked at Marith. "Speaker. A word." Marith nodded, and the 2 of them stepped together to the far end of the long chamber, where the firelight did not quite reach. Yvain watched them speak. She could not hear the words. She watched her mate, the alpha who had once been the most powerful wolf in the Northern Reach, and who was now a recovering man with a tremor in his offhand, bow his head to listen to a small gray old woman with a black staff. She watched Marith nod, once, twice, and then lay her gnarled palm flat against Kadrin's chest, over his heart, and hold it there for a long count. Kadrin came back to her. He sat. He took her hand. I have asked her, he said, what the rite of seating requires. She will tell us tomorrow. She has also asked me a question, and I have answered it, and I will now ask you the same question, because she said it was not hers to ask. Ask. His golden eyes searched her face. When you are seated, he said, and the hollowed line is restored, and the reach answers to you and not only to me, will you have me as your bonded under the old law as well as the new? Her hand went still in his. She understood slowly what he was asking. He was not asking her to marry him again. He was asking whether, when she stood in the hollowed hall on a throne older than his, she would still want him in the place beside it. Whether the queen she was about to become could love the man who had walked to a dais in the hall of sundered stars and chosen another woman with his own mouth. She did not answer right away. She let the question sit. She let the 4 months of grief sit. She let the night in the snow garden sit. She let the marsh sit, and the cottage sit, and the moment her mark had opened and his grief had come through it. She let Marith's words sit. The man bears it for the rest of his life, whether or not the wolf in him agreed. She let all of it sit, and she let none of it answer for her. Then she said, very quietly, yes. His breath went out of him in a long, ragged release. But not yet, she said. Not tonight, and not tomorrow. The work of forgiving you is going to take longer than the rite of seating. I will not lie to you about that. There will be days when I cannot look at you. There will be days when I make you sleep on the other side of a closed door. The bond will burn, and we will both burn with it, and we will burn until the burning is finished, and I do not know how long that will be. I know. And on the day it is finished, Kadrin Marrowvein, you will kneel in front of the standing stones, and you will swear to me what the man in the hall of sundered stars did not swear, and you will swear it knowing that this time it is the man and not the wolf who is doing the swearing, and there will be no compound in your cup, and no vorin at your back, and the swearing will be yours alone. Yes. That is the word I will accept. He bent his head over their joined hands. He did not say anything else. After a long moment, she felt something wet on the back of her wrist and realized that the alpha of the northern reach was weeping silently into her knuckles, and she let him, because there was nothing she could say to it that would not be smaller than the silence. She slept that night in a chamber that had been made up for her with mountain wool blankets and a fire of pine in the small hearth. Kadrin slept on a pallet outside her door, in the corridor, with the brindle wolf curled at his feet and his sword laid across his knees. Mareth slept somewhere in the lower hall. The wolves of the reach slept ranged around the standing stones outside. The hollowed hall slept. Yvain dreamed. In the dream, she stood on a hill above a great hall she did not recognize, and the hall was burning, and from the hall a horn was sounding, low and rolling, the same horn she had heard in the marsh. Below her, in a long line of riders coming up the road toward the burning hall, she saw her own face at the head of the column, and beside her, a black wolf the size of a horse, and behind her a banner she could not quite make out except that it bore a wolf-headed woman in silver thread on a field of dark green. She woke before dawn with the dream sharp in her chest. She lay in the dark of her chamber and listened to the fire and to Kadrin's even breathing on the other side of the door, and she understood slowly that the dream had not been a memory and had not been a wish. It had been a forecast. She rose. She wrapped a wool robe around herself and stepped out into the corridor. Kadrin came awake the moment her foot touched the stone, his hand already on the hilt of his sword, his eyes already golden in the dim. He saw it was her, and the gold softened. My queen? Send for Marith, she said quietly, and for Vale, and for whoever among your guard you trust most with bad news. What has happened? She looked down at him in the dim light, the alpha of the Reach, sitting on a pallet outside her door with a wolf at his feet and a sword across his knees, and she said, I have seen the next thing. The Voron line is not waiting. They are moving on the Reach itself. By the time we ride back, there will not be a Reach to ride back to. We have less time than we thought. Kadrin rose. The brindle wolf rose with him, and the hollowed hall, which had been quiet for 11 generations, began, very slowly, to wake. The war council sat in the hollowed hall before the sun had fully cleared the eastern ridge. Yvain took the seat at the head of the long table because Merith Solwen, without ceremony, pulled the carved chair out from the wall and set it there for her. The chair was older than anything else in the hall. Its arms had been worn smooth by the hands of women dead 11 generations. Ivani sat in it the way a woman sits in a chair her grandmother once sat in, carefully, conscious of the weight, and she set her palms flat on the table and looked around at the faces in the dim pre-dawn light. Kadrin on her right, Merith on her left, veil of the hollowed keepers behind Merith's shoulder. 3 of Kadrin's hand-picked guard, 2 men and a woman, ranged at the foot of the table. The brindle she-wolf, in human form for the first time since the marsh, sat in a leather jerkin at Kadrin's elbow and was named, Yvain learned, Heska Vinthrop, second of his pack and his oldest sworn blade. Heska Vinthrop had been the one Kadrin trusted to ride south with him for 4 months without sleeping in a bed. Yvain took the measure of her quickly, brindle hair cut short, a scar across the bridge of her nose, eyes that did not waste themselves on small things. Heska did not bow when she sat. She had bowed already, in the marsh, and Ivana understood that the wolves of the Reach considered a thing bowed for to stay bowed for. Tell them what you saw, Merith said quietly. Yvain told them. She told the dream the way she had decided, lying in the dark before dawn, that she was going to tell it. Not as a vision, not as a hollowed gift, as a report. The hall burning, the horn sounding. Her own face at the head of a column riding up the road. The wolf-headed woman on the green banner. She did not tell them what the dream had felt like inside her chest, because the feeling was not theirs to carry. She told them only the shape of the thing, and she watched their faces. Kadrin's face did not move. Heska Vinthrop's face did not move. Merith Solwyn's face moved slightly, a single small tightening at the corners of her colorless eyes, and Yvain understood that the old woman had already known what the dream meant before Yvain had finished describing it. Speak, speaker, Kadrin said. Merith folded her hands on the table. The hollowed line, she said, does not dream the way the wolf blood of the Reach dreams. We do not see our own futures. We see the seams in the cloth. Your queen has not seen what will happen. She has seen what is already happening, 400 miles from here, while we sit at this table. The hall in her dream is the hall of sundered stars. The horn is the Voron rallying horn. The banner she could not quite see is the green of the hollowed line, which means the dream is showing her the road she has not yet ridden. She is not riding to a hall she will save. She is riding to a hall she will reclaim from people who have already taken it. How long? Kadrin said. His voice was very level. 3 days, perhaps 4. The Voron line has been waiting 11 generations for this hour. They will not waste a week of it. What are they doing right now? Right now, Merith said. Sable Voron is in your hall of sundered stars in a coronation gown, and the law speaker is being held in his own chamber under guard, and the assembled banners are being told that the Alpha of the Reach has gone mad in his grief and ridden into the wilderness and will not return, and that the bonded he set aside in his madness is being lawfully restored to her station and elevated under the older blood claim of House Voron. By tonight, she will be calling herself Queen Regent. By the 3rd night, she will be calling herself Queen. The law speaker will sign, or the law speaker will be replaced by a Voron cousin who will sign, and the Reach will wake on the 5th day to a banner over Marrow Vane Keep that is not yours. Kadrin did not move. His left hand, the offhand with the tremor, was flat on the table. The tremor was not in it this morning. Yvain noticed that without looking at him directly. The wolf in him had finished burning the compound out somewhere in the last day of riding, or somewhere in the night with his sword across his knees. And the Alpha of the Northern Reach was the Alpha of the Northern Reach again. And the Voren line, 400 miles north, did not yet know that. "My queen," he said. "Yes. Permission to take 20 wolves and ride for the Reach within the hour." "No." His head turned. She had said it without raising her voice. She watched him register the refusal, watched the wolf in him push briefly against it, and watched the man rein the wolf in. He did not argue. He waited. "You ride for the Reach with 20 wolves," she said, "and you arrive on a dying horse 5 days from now, with no cohesion, and no plan, and no ground behind you. You ride into a keep you have not been able to enter safely for 14 months, against a coronation that will already have happened by the time your boot crosses the gate. You will fight beautifully and you will die alone, and the Voren line will burn your body in the courtyard and tell the Reach that the mad Alpha has been put down." His jaw worked. "What would the Queen have me do instead?" "I am still deciding," she said. "Marith, the seating right. How long does it take?" Marith's pale eyes flickered once. "Properly," the old woman said. 3 nights. The walking of the stones, the drinking of the spring, the burning of the old name." "And improperly?" "1 night. The walking only. The crown is set. The wolves of the high country are summoned. The line is declared in the open and the standing stones witness it. It is not the full rite. It is enough." "It is enough for what?" "For the wolves of the high country to ride under your banner, for the law to recognize a hallowed sovereign in the field, for any oath sworn to you between tonight and the next full moon to bind under both the old law and the new." "And the wolves of the high country are how many?" Marith did not answer immediately. She looked at Vael, who had been silent at her shoulder, and Vael spoke for the first time in a voice that was younger than his face. 2,040, Vael said. "At the last count. They are scattered across 9 valleys. They have been waiting. They will come within a day of the summons being lit." The room went quiet. Yvain watched Kadrin's face do the arithmetic. 2,000 wolves of the high country, sworn to the hollowed line under the old law. Plus, whatever loyal banners in the Reach would tear themselves free of the Voren coronation the moment they had a legitimate sovereign to tear toward. Plus his own pack, which was perhaps 300 sword-blooded wolves of marrow vein. It was an army. It was the army he had not realized he could raise. "My queen," he said, slower this time, the wolf in him very close to the surface. "Permission to ride for the Reach in 5 days, at the head of the wolves of the high country, under the banner of the hollowed line, with the Alpha of the Reach as your sword arm and not your sovereign." Yvain held his gaze, weighing him. "Permission granted," she said. Heska Vinthrop, at Kadrin's elbow, did something small that took Yvain a second to identify. She bowed her head. Not the deep bow of the marsh, a shorter, soldier's bow, the bow of a sworn blade acknowledging a battle order from a commander she did not yet know but had decided, in the moment, to trust. Yvain filed Heska Vinthrop in the part of her mind that was rapidly becoming a queen's mind, and she turned to Mareth. "Tonight," she said, "light the summons, walk the stones, set the crown." "Yes, my queen." "Vael, my queen. Send your fastest rider down to Brennick-on-Marsh. Find a girl named Atili at the Cooper's house. Tell her I have not forgotten her. Tell her mother the village is to take in any traveler from the north who arrives with a hollowed pendant of bone, and that any traveler from the south carrying Voren coin is to be turned away at the marsh edge. Tell them the marsh healer says so." Val blinked, just once. "My queen." "Kadrin, my queen." She looked at her mate. She looked at the Alpha of the Northern Reach, who had walked to a dais in the Hall of Sundered Stars 4 months ago and broken her, and who was sitting at her right hand now with a tremor that had finished, and a wolf that was burning gold all the way through. "Choose the 20 wolves you would have ridden with this morning," she said. "They are going to ride tonight. Not to the Reach, to the 9 valleys. Each pair carries the summons to one of the high country packs. They will be back here in 2 days with 2,000 wolves at their backs, and we will ride for the Reach on the 3rd day. And we will be at the gates of Marrowvane Keep on the 7th, and Sable Vorin will be wearing a crown that does not fit when we arrive." Kadrin rose from his chair. "My queen." He did not bow. He did something the Reach did not have a name for. He set his right hand flat over his heart, and his left hand flat on the table, and he held the position for the count of 3, and Heska Vinthrop and the 2 other guards rose with him and did the same, and the hollowed hall held that gesture for a long, quiet moment in the early gray light, and Yvain Maris of the cottage in the marsh, who had been a healer's daughter and was no longer, sat in a chair older than her own kingdom, and let it be done to her. The first cliffhanger of her reign as a queen who had not yet been crowned was that the dream had not been wrong, and the council, by the 2nd hour of the morning, was already moving like a thing that had decided to live. The summons fire was lit at sundown. Yvain stood at the center of the standing stones in a wool gown the color of dark green moss, with her hair unbound and the small worn iron crown of the hollowed queen set on her head. The crown did not feel like a crown. It felt like a stone. She made herself accept the stone. Marith Solwyn walked her around the 12 stones in the order of the right, naming each of the wolf-headed women carved into them as she passed, and Yvain spoke each name back. And at the 7th stone she stopped, because she felt the babies kick from both sides at once. Marith saw it. The old woman did not pause the rite. "They know," Marith said quietly. "Walk on, my queen." She walked on. She drank from the cold spring at the foot of the 12th stone. She burned the small twist of paper on which she had written her old name. She stood inside the ring of stones with the iron crown on her head and the fire behind her, and the wolves of Kadrin's pack, every one of them, in human form for the right, ranged in a wide circle outside the ring with their right hands flat over their hearts. Kadrin was in the center of them. He was not in the ring with her. The right did not allow it. He stood at the edge with his hand over his heart, and his head bowed and his throat bared, and when Mareth Solwyn lifted her black staff and named Ivani in the old language as Hallowed Queen, last daughter of the line of the murdered, sovereign of the high country and of all wolf blood that answers to the older law, Kadrin Marrowvane, Alpha of the Northern Reach, went to his knees in the cold high grass with 20 of his sworn blades behind him doing the same. Yvain did not look at him. She could not. In the right. The right allowed her only to look forward, between the 2nd and 3rd stones, at the road that led down out of the high country toward the Reach. She looked at the road. The road was empty in the dusk. In 4 days it would not be. The summons fire climbed, and from the 9 valleys around them, one at a time and then in answer to one another, distant fires lit in reply. They rode for the Reach on the 4th morning. 2,040 wolves of the high country had come down out of the 9 valleys in 2 days, the way Val had said they would. They came in companies, each one led by a pack mother with a bone pendant at her throat and a long staff of black wood across her saddle, and each pack mother walked alone into the standing stones to look at Yvain and to acknowledge her, and then walked out again to take her place at the head of her wolves. They did not bow as Heska Vinthrop had bowed. They greeted her as kin. The hollowed line did not bow to its queen. It walked beside her. By the morning of the ride, the long pale valley below the hollowed hall held an army. Yvain rode at the head of it. She rode the brindle she-wolf, who was Heska Vinthrop in wolf form, and the brindle wolf had earned the carrying of the queen by a battle she had won in the marsh that Yvain had not seen the end of. Kadrin rode his black stallion at her right. Marith Solwyn rode her tough little mountain pony at her left, with the black staff across her saddle. Vale rode at the rear of the column with the keepers of the hallowed fires. Behind them came the high country wolves in their 9 companies, and behind those, Kadrin's pack. And behind those, the long banner of dark green with the wolf-headed woman in silver thread, carried by a girl of the hollowed line who was perhaps 15 and had not stopped smiling since the moment she had been handed the staff. They rode at the pace of the wolves, which was faster than the pace of horses, and they covered ground that should have taken 7 days in 4. On the dawn of the 5th day, they came over the last ridge above the reach. Marrowvane Keep stood on the far side of the river in the hard pale light, with the smoke of its morning fires rising thin and untroubled. From this distance the keep looked exactly as it had looked the night Yvain had walked out of the servants' gate 4 months ago, except for one thing. The banner above the great gate was not the running wolf of House Marrowvane. It was the crossed daggers of House Vorin. Kadrin made a sound low in his chest that was not a word. "Easy," Yvain said. "My queen. Easy. We do this the way we agreed to do it. Marith, the herald." Marith nodded once and turned her pony, and the order went down the column. A single rider broke from the front of the army, the green banner of the hollowed line in his right hand, and a white truce pennant in his left, and he rode alone down the long slope toward the river, toward the gates of Marrowvane Keep, toward Sable Vorin and her stolen coronation. He carried a written message. The message was simple. The hallowed queen of the high country, sovereign of the older law, requested an audience with the woman calling herself Queen Regent of the Northern Reach. The audience would take place in the Hall of Sundered Stars at the 2nd hour past noon. The Alpha of the Reach would attend as the hallowed queen's sworn blade. Refusal of the audience would be regarded under both the old law and the new as a confession of conspiracy. The herald carried the message to the gate of Marrowvane Keep. He did not return. By the 1st hour past noon, when he had not come back, Yvain mounted the brindle wolf again and rode with the army down to the river crossing. She crossed the bridge. She rode through the lower city of Marrowvane, which had emptied of every soul as they came, the windows shuttering one by one ahead of her, and the streets clearing as though a tide were going out. She rode up the long stone avenue toward the gates of the keep, and behind her, the army of the high country came in a wedge that took up the avenue from wall to wall. The gates of Marrowvane Keep were closed. On the wall above them, in plain view, a body was hanging. It was the herald. Yvain stopped the brindle wolf at the foot of the wall and looked up at the body of the boy who had carried her message, and she did not move for a long moment. She felt Kadrin's stallion come up beside her. She felt Marith's pony come up at her other side. She felt the army at her back fall completely still. She felt, opening up in her chest, the old furious thing that had woken in her blood in the marsh, and this time it was not patient at all. "Kadrin," she said, "my queen." The law speaker. "Where is he?" "Inside the keep, held in his own chamber," Marith said. "Alive?" "As of the dream." "Yes." "Is there a way in that does not require the front gate?" He looked at her. "There is a postern at the east tower," he said slowly. "It opens on the river. It is small, 2 abreast. It is not on any of the maps that left the keep in the last 4 generations. 3 of my pack know it. Heska, myself, and one other. Take her. Take Heska. Take the 3rd one. Go in the postern. Find the law speaker and bring him out alive. The army is going to take the front gate at the 2nd hour past noon, and you are going to be at the law speaker's side when it does. My queen, the front gate. The front gate is mine." He did not argue. He turned the stallion. He raised his hand. Heska Vinthrop and a tall, thin wolf shape Yvain did not yet know the name of broke from the column and rode after him down the riverside of the wall, and they were lost from sight in under a minute. Yvain sat the brindle wolf in front of the gates of Marrowvane Keep. She lifted her right hand. Behind her, the wolves of the high country began to sing. It was not a war cry. It was older. It was a long, low, multi-voiced sound that climbed the wall of the keep and passed over its battlements and got inside. The way smoke gets inside, and Yvain saw the men on the wall above her go still and then begin to look at one another. And she understood that the wolves of the high country were singing the old hollowed summoning song, the one that had not been sung outside of the high valleys in 11 generations. And the wolf blood of the Reach was hearing it in their bones whether they wanted to or not. Two of the men on the wall threw down their weapons. A third tried to draw his bow on the singers and was struck down by the man beside him. The gate of Marrowvane Keep, which had been closed against a queen, began to open from the inside. It opened slowly. It opened the way a thing opens when men inside it are arguing with one another over whether to open it. It opened, and through the opening came a thin column of Vorin blades, perhaps 30 of them, hardened men who had not heard any song they were prepared to obey, and they came out at a hard run with weapons drawn, and they came for her. Yvonne did not move. She heard Marith Solwyn beside her draw breath to give her some warning or instruction, and she lifted her hand to stop the old woman, because the thing in her blood that had been waking up for a week had decided finally what it was going to do. It was going to be seen. She slid down off the brindlewolf. She stood on the avenue in front of the gates of Marrowvane Keep in her dark green wool, with the small worn iron crown of the hollowed queens on her unbound hair and her hand on the swell of her belly. And the 30 Vorin blades came at her in a tightening wedge, and she let them come for 10 paces. And at the 11th pace, she did the thing she had not known she could do until that morning, when Marith had told her that there was one more gift the hollowed line gave its sovereigns, and it was the rarest gift, and it had skipped 4 queens out of the last 7, and she should not count on it, and she should not be afraid if it did not come. She spoke in the old language. She said one word. Marith had taught it to her at dawn. The word meant, in the closest translation the new tongue allowed, down. The 30 Vorin blades were not wolf-blooded, but the men inside the gate, and the men on the wall, and the men in the courtyard beyond, and every wolf-blooded creature within the curtain wall of Marrowvane Keep, and the wolves themselves in the kennels at the back of the keep, all of them, every one, all of them went to their knees at the same moment. The 30 Vorin blades, in the wedge, found themselves running into a courtyard of kneeling allies. They faltered. That was all the army of the high country needed. The wolves of the 9 valleys came up the avenue past Yvain in a single dark surge, and they hit the stalled Vorin wedge, and the wedge broke, and the wolves of the high country flooded through the open gate and into the courtyard, and the song did not stop, and the kneeling men did not rise. Yvain walked through the gate of Marrowvane Keep. Marith Solwyn walked at her left, the black staff in her hand. The girl with the green banner walked behind her. The brindle wolf had returned to her hip the moment the wedge broke, and Yvain laid her hand lightly on the brindle's shoulder as she walked, and the brindle leaned into her hand, and they crossed the courtyard of the keep that Cadron Marrowvane had not been able to enter safely for 14 months, and not a hand was raised against her. She walked up the long stone steps to the doors of the great keep. She walked through them. She walked down the central aisle of the Hall of Sundered Stars, where 4 months ago she had watched Cadron Marrowvane bind himself to another woman, and she walked toward the dais of black granite and the ancient throne of the Northern Reach, and on the throne, in a coronation gown of crimson and gold, sat Sable Vorin. Sable rose when she saw her. The 2 women looked at each other across the long marble basin of the hall. There was a moment, very brief, in which Sable Vorin might have said something. Yvain saw her consider it. Yvain saw the Vorin calculation behind the pale eyes, plead, threaten, offer terms, accuse. And Yvain saw her arrive, fast, at the only honest answer that was available to her, which was that nothing she said was going to alter the next 10 minutes of her life. So Sable Voren did the thing Yvain had not expected. She straightened her shoulders. She lifted her chin. She did not move from the dais. "You are not crowned," she said. Her voice carried. "No," Yvain said. "I am hollowed." That is not a thing the Reach has ever recognized. It is now. By whose authority? Mine. And the wolves on either side of you, who will not look up. Sable Voren glanced, almost involuntarily, at the two members of her own houseguard standing behind the throne. Both of them were on their knees, heads bowed to the stone. A side door at the back of the dais opened. Kadrin came through it. He came through it with Heska Vinthrop at his shoulder, and the third of his pack at his other shoulder, and between them, walking on his own feet but barely, was the old law speaker, alive, blinking in the light of the hall, the ceremonial chain of office held in his shaking hand. Sable Voren turned her head and saw him. Her shoulders did not slump. Yvain respected that briefly. Sable Voren was finished, and she knew she was finished, and she was not going to give the hall the show of breaking. Kadrin walked to the foot of the dais. He looked up at his bonded by the old law, the woman he had been bound to for 4 months by the spoken word of his man-self, while his wolf-self had been held under water, and Yvain watched him decide, very visibly, to be the man and not the wolf for the next minute of his life. "Sable of House Vorin," he said, "step down from the throne." She stepped down. She did it slowly. She did it with her eyes on him, not on Yvain. "Kadrin," she said. It was the first time she had said his name in front of witnesses, and it was the only weapon she had left, and she used it. "You loved me, even through the compound. The man loved me. Do not pretend you did not." He looked at her. "The man," he said, "ate poison out of your hand for 14 months. The man does not know what he loved or did not love during that time, and the man will spend the rest of his life trying to understand what he is responsible for and what he is not. But the wolf in me knew what you were from the night of the binding feast, and the wolf is awake now. And the wolf is going to live with what the man did, and the man is going to live with what the man did, and you, Sable Voren, are going to live with what you did, and you are going to live with it in a tower on the western coast, where you will not see another wolf-blooded creature until the day you die." Her eyes flickered. She had braced, Yvain realized, for execution. The thing Kadrin had just offered her was, in the calculus of a Voren daughter, worse. The law speaker, behind her, lifted his shaking voice in the formal cadence of his office. "The binding of Kadrin Marrowvein and Sable Voren, contracted under conspiracy, sustained by compound, witnessed by an assembly to whom material facts had been concealed, was hereby set aside under the law of the Reach. The line of House Voren was hereby attainted under the same law, all titles forfeit, all lands held in trust by the throne until further judgment. The woman Sable Voren was hereby remanded to the western tower of Glass on Sea for the term of her natural life." Sable Voren was led out of the Hall of Sundered Stars by 2 wolves of the high country. She did not look back. Yvain Maris stood at the foot of the dais of black granite, and Kadrin Marrowvein stood at her right, and Marith Solwyn stood at her left, and the law speaker stood 3 paces behind her with the chain of office in his trembling hand, and the hall was full of kneeling men and standing wolves, and the thin gold afternoon light coming down through the high arched windows. Kadrin turned to her. He did the thing he had done in the marsh. He went to one knee. He laid his right hand palm up at her feet. "My queen," he said in front of 1,000 witnesses, "Alpha of the Northern Reach kneels to the hallowed queen. The Reach answers to you. The wolves of the Reach answer to you. I answer to you." Yvain Maris took his hand. This time she pulled him up. The Reach did not heal in a day. It did not heal in a week. The first month after the seeding was the hardest. There were still Voron cousins inside the curtain wall, who had to be sorted from the loyal and the merely frightened. There were still poisoned stores in the kitchens that had to be burned. There was still the old law speaker, who had to be moved into the keeper rooms of the hollowed hall to recover, and who Yvain sat with for an hour every morning until the tremor in his hands quieted and the fear behind his eyes began to thin. There were still the wolves of the high country, 2,000 of them, who had to be billeted and fed, and the pack mothers of the 9 valleys, who had to be received in the Hall of Sundered Stars and treated as the foreign sovereigns they technically were. There was Kadren. Yvain did not lie about it to herself. The work of forgiving him was harder, after the seeding, not easier. The day-to-day reality of being hollowed queen of the reach beside the alpha who had bound himself to another woman in this very hall 4 months ago was not a thing the right had healed. It was a thing she had to do herself, alone, in the slow hours. She did it. She did it the way she had told him she would do it, in the hollowed hall on the second night. There were days she could not look at him. There were nights she made him sleep in his own old chamber across the keep from hers. The bond burned, and they both burned with it, and they burned for almost a full cycle of the moon, and on the night the burning finished, and she knew it had finished, the way she knew the babies were coming when they began to come. She sent for him. He came. He stood inside the door of her chamber with his hand on the latch, and his head slightly bowed and his gold eyes very steady, and he waited. She walked across the room to him. She put her hand flat over his heart. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, "at the standing stones outside the hollowed hall. The ride is 2 days. We will leave at dawn. You will swear to me what the man in this hall did not swear, and you will swear it knowing that the wolf is awake, and the compound is gone, and the swearing is yours alone." "Yes." "And after the swearing, Kadren Marrowvein, you will come back to my chamber, and you will not sleep across the keep from me again." He bent his forehead to hers. "Yes," he said again. It was almost the only word he had used to her in 3 weeks. They rode. He swore at the standing stones in the cold high grass, with the iron crown of the hollowed queens on her head, and the dark green banner of the hollowed line snapping in the mountain wind behind her. He swore in his own voice, the man and the wolf together, and he swore for the rest of his natural life, and he swore in front of Marith Solwyn and Vale and Heska Vinthrop, and the brindle she-wolf and the pack mothers of the 9 valleys, who had come down out of the high country to witness it. The babies kicked from both sides at once when he set his palm over Yvain's belly at the close of the swearing, and Marith Solwyn smiled, very faintly, for the first time since Yvain had known her. That was the autumn. The babies came in the deep of winter, in the Queen's chamber of Marrowvein Keep, with Marith Solwyn at her right hand, and Heska Vinthrop at her left, and Kadren on his knees beside the bed, with his forehead pressed to her thigh, and his eyes squeezed shut for most of it, because the alpha of the Northern Reach, who had ridden 4 months without sleeping in a bed, and had taken 3 poisoned arrows in the Western campaign of his 2nd year, and had killed 2 grown bears with his bare wolf hands in the pass at Hollow Cleft, could not look directly at his bonded in pain. A boy came first, dark hair, Kadren's mouth. He cried once and then went quiet and looked, with eyes that had not yet decided what color they were going to be, at the woman who had carried him. A girl came after. Pale hair, Yvain's mouth. She did not cry at all. She came out into Marith Solwyn's gnarled hands, and Marith made a sound the rest of them had never heard from her in any of the months they had known her, a quiet, broken noise of pure joy, and laid the girl on Yvain's chest, and the girl opened her eyes, and her eyes were the colorless pale blue of the hollowed line. Marith bent her head. "My queen," she said very softly. "The line is restored." Yvain did not answer for a long moment. She was holding both of her children. Kedron's hand had crept up to lie alongside her own at the edge of the smaller one's blanket, and his hand was shaking again. But this time, she understood. The shaking was not the compound. The shaking was the man. She found her voice. "Names," she said. Kedron raised his head. "For him," he said, "I would like the name Ronan, if it pleases the queen. It was my grandfather's name, and the only marrow vein in 9 generations who would not have done what I did." "Ronan," she said. "Yes." "And for her?" Yvain looked down at the small pale girl on her chest. "Her name is Solwen," she said, "after the woman who walked 1,200 miles to find me." Marith Solwen, kneeling beside the bed with the girl's birth blanket in her hands, did the thing she had done in the marsh. Almost. Her shoulders shook once, very briefly, and her colorless eyes went bright in the firelight, and she did not say anything, because she did not need to. Kedron bent his head over their joined hands. "My queen," he said quietly, "in this life and any life after this one, I will not ask the man inside me to make a choice the wolf has not agreed to. I swear it again. I will swear it every winter. I will swear it until I am too old to swear anything, and then I will swear it in my sleep." She set her hand against his face. "I know," she said. Outside the queen's chamber in the courtyard of Marrow Vein Keep, the wolves of the Reach and the wolves of the High Country, who had been waiting all night on the cold stones in their hundreds, lifted their voices together at the sound of the second cry. It was not a war cry. It was not a song. It was the sound wolves make when a thing that has been broken for a very long time is mended, and Ivani heard it through the high-arched window of her chamber. And she closed her eyes, and she let the sound carry her. The Vorin line was attainted to the 3rd generation by the Spring Assembly of the Northern Reach. The lands were taken into trust for the children of the Hollowed Queen. Sable Vorin lived in the western tower of Glass on Sea for 19 years and died in the 2nd month of the 20th, alone, with a single wolf-blooded keeper at her door. Lord Vorin had been found dead the night Marrowvein Keep fell, in his own chambers in the Vorin townhouse on the southern bank of the river, and his hall in the Silver Country had been sealed, and the ashes of his estate scattered as the law required. The compound was traced by Marith Solwyn and Val, and 3 keepers of the Hollowed Line, through 8 households in the Reach, and 4 houses in the southern Client kingdoms, and every kitchen that had passed it was closed. The herbalist who had compounded it was found in a house in the lower city of Marrowvein and taken under the older law, and what was done to him was done quietly, and the Reach did not speak of it. The hollowed hall was no longer empty. It was where the queen and the alpha and the children went each summer, for the warm months, and the standing stones were walked by the children as soon as they could walk, and the iron crown of the hollowed queens spent the winters in the queen's chamber of Marrowvein Keep, and the summers on its old stand in the hollowed hall, and it was set on Yvain's head every full moon for the rest of her life, and on her daughter's head after that, and the line was not lost again. Marith Solwyn lived 9 more years. She died in the Queen's chamber of the Hollowed Hall in the first warm week of a high country spring, with her hand in Yvain's hand and her colorless eyes very steady to the last, and her last words were not to Yvain, but to the small pale girl who had been named for her, who was 8 years old and knew already, the way the Hollowed knew, that her grandmother by name was leaving. "Walk the stones," Marith told the girl. "All 12. Every full moon. Do not skip the 7th one." "I will not, grandmother." "Good." She closed her eyes. She did not open them again. The wolves of the high country sang her down for 3 nights at the standing stones, and on the 4th morning the small pale girl walked the 12 stones for the first time alone, with her mother watching from the inside of the ring, and she did not skip the 7th one, and the hollowed line went on. In the very last year of her life, when she was a very old woman with white hair, and her daughter was on the throne of the Reach, and her son was the Alpha of the High Country, and her grandchildren were everywhere underfoot. A vain marrow vein of the hollowed line was asked, by a young scholar from the lower city of Marrowvane who had come to record the history of the queening, what the single most important thing was that she wanted the chronicle to say. She thought about it for a long time. She was sitting in the carved chair at the head of the long table in the hollowed hall, the chair her foremothers had sat in, and the chair her daughter would sit in, with Cadron Marrowvane, very old and very thin and very gold-eyed, in his own chair beside her, his hand laid lightly over hers. "Tell them," she said at last, "that I was cast aside and that I came back. Tell them I came back not to be taken in again, but to be answered to. Tell them the man who cast me aside is the same man whose hand is on mine right now, and that the work of forgiving him took longer than the building of this hall, and was harder than the riding of the high country, and that I would do it again, every part of it, in this life and any life after this one. Tell them the line of the hollowed is not a line of women who were rescued. Tell them it is a line of women who came home." The scholar wrote it down. She sat in the carved chair until the sun went down behind the spur of Black Mountain, with her hand in Cadron's hand and the wolves of the high country settling for the night beyond the standing stones, and the small ring of fire in the hearth burning steady, the way the hollowed fires had always burned, and the way they were going to keep burning for as long as there was a hand to lay the wood. She closed her eyes. She rested. She had come home a long time ago. She was, finally, allowed to be tired.